Book 1, The Forest at the Edge of the World, Chapter 22. Do I look like I'm about to do something stupid? And so that resolves the concerns about soldiers patrolling along the canal system, but we're still having some complaints from farmers in the east. It seems that Captain Shin's face began to contort. Karna started to smile and glanced over to the new staff sergeant and master sergeant who were sitting with him in the forward command office. The master sergeant glanced over at the sand clock on Shin's bookshelf, nodded in admiration, and smiled at the lieutenant. Shin's face continued to twist until he could no longer fight it. He yawned. The rotund staff sergeant smiled. "Well done, sir. Nearly time for dinner, and that's your first yawn." The three men chuckled as Shin glared good-naturedly at them. "You said you weren't going to do that anymore." "There's so little to entertain us now, Captain," Karna sighed in feigned sadness. "Quiet forest for over a year, and now that it's the beginning of raining season again, well, garters hate the snow. Nothing will be happening for at least another moon until planting begins. We keep ourselves sharp by guessing how much sleep you lose each night." "And it's only going to get worse when that second baby comes, sir," the gnarled master sergeant drawled. "Why, we can take bets for at least another 3 seasons. Shin smiled reluctantly as the men laughed. "Grampy Neeks, knowing you, there's a chart somewhere in your quarters. You know how I feel about gambling. No slips of silver, only bragging rights, and being right is better than being rich around here. We've all accepted that, sir," he said with a smile in his eyes. "So far, I'm the rightest one around." "You always are, Neeks." Shin couldn't help but chuckle. For as long as Perrin knew Neeks, the man had been called Grampy. His red hair went prematurely gray when he was 20, and he had a naturally weather-beaten look as if he were a decades-old stockade fence. He also had a monotonous way of slow-talking that said, "Don't interrupt me, boy, or I'll take you out to the woodshed after I finally finish the story and make you chop 4 cords of wood, then make you build another shed to hold it all, so help me now sit down, shut up, and show some respect, because I'm not going to take no mouth from no one." He was perfect for whipping the new recruits into shape. Perrin had requested him specifically as Wiles's replacement, and was stunned to realize that when he opened Grampy's file from the High General, Master Sergeant Neeks was only 40 years old. Perrin wondered if he would seem as ancient and gnarled in 10 more short years of serving in the Army. Maybe the weathering effect only occurred to the enlisted men. The other new addition to the fort, Staff Sergeant Gazada, replaced the Master Sergeant who retired right after the forest raid, and was almost a complete opposite. While Neeks was as pale and gray as the strongest mortar, Gazada was as dark and brown as the richest soils. And even though he was 6 years older than Perrin, he looked more like an overgrown boy, with a round face that matched the rest of his body, dark cheeks that were hued a deep red, and a tongue that was always licking his lips as if knowing dinner was on the way. The former head cook of midday meal at the garrison was a good fit as supply master. "Sir, I'm not in lack of anything to do around here," Gazada said jovially. "I keep myself well entertained." "So that's the problem, Karna? Not enough entertainment for you?" Shin asked. "I didn't realize you were so eager to get back into the forest." "I can arrange that, if you insist." His lieutenant paled as the sergeant sniggered. "No, sir. I don't want you violating your father's orders again. Why, he might promote me ahead of you." Shin's eyebrows went up as the sergeants chuckled. There was a nod on the office door, and Neeks opened it. "You're a little late today, messenger," Grampy said severely to the young man holding the bag from Idemia. Neeks never passed up an opportunity to dress down a young soldier. "Yes, sir. Sorry, sirs." He nodded toward Captain Shin. "The messenger I met in Vine said there were some last-minute administrative additions to the pack in Idemia, and as you know, we're not allowed to leave until all of them are satisfied." He took the pack off his back and handed it to Grampy, who kept the eyebrow up. "Then I suppose it's remarkable you get to leave at all," Karna mumbled daringly. Shin nodded back to the messenger. "I won't have anything to return for at least half an hour while I sort through this. Might as well take your meal here than in Mount Scene." Be in line at the mess hall, Gazada recommended. Roast venison in a button mushroom sauce with butter, spuds. Mwah! He kissed his fingers. Thank you, sirs, the messenger said happily, before having his grin wiped away by Neeks's still menacing eyebrow. As he bolted down the stairs, Neeks dropped the pack on Shin's large oak desk. Feels a little heavier today, Captain. Need some help going through it? Probably, Perrin said, pulling out some of the contents. More notices? We're going to have to build larger notice boards around Edge just to hold them all. Or ask the administrators to be more concise, Karna nodded as he picked up a large document detailing something mundane. Shin sat down at his desk and sorted through the pile. Ah, this one looks promising, nice and small. He grinned as he looked at the plain beeswax seal. Something in his belly tightened, but maybe it was because he was now thinking about venison, and could hear Gazada's round abdomen rumbling. As the other soldiers sorted through the message pack, Perrin opened the small folded document, frowned at the unfamiliar writing, then swallowed as he read the sentence. For a minute, none of the other men noticed that he hadn't moved, until Neeks glanced up and saw the dead look in his eyes. Sir, something wrong? Shin didn't answer. Captain? Karna tried. Shin only swallowed and again refolded the message. Men, take care of the rest of this for me, please. Anything important, leave it on the desk. I'll be back in 45 minutes. He stood up and put on his cap. Sir, Karna said, stunned that the captain would leave while messages needed addressing. And when I come back, you may find something far more interesting to do than timing my yawns. Rector Densel released a heavy sigh and looked at the note in his hands. Perrin, I think your father might have more insight than me. I don't think I have that kind of time, Perrin said gravely, as he sat across from Hogel at his eating table. Tabit stood behind Hogel, reading over his shoulder. Are you going to tell Mari? Perrin shrugged. According to number 3 on my mother's list, I shouldn't give Mari anything unnecessary to worry about. One never knows when the mother bear instinct may arise. Tabit nodded. Joriana was always very smart in these things. I don't know, Hogel mused. Mari might need to know that a dozen garters have her and little Jatesy marked. Oh, that's not really what it means, Tabit blanched. Is it? What else would it mean, Auntie? Perrin said, trying to keep his growing rage and worry out of his great-aunt and uncle's house, unsuccessfully. It's written in a hand I'm not familiar with, and by the tightness of it, it looks like they even took pains to disguise it just to be sure. Somehow, it got smuggled into the message bag. Only administrators in the army could submit messages to that service. The messenger said the pack was delayed in leaving Idemia early this morning, and that's why, he gestured furiously at the note. Someone took great risks to get me that warning, and they wouldn't bother unless it's a real threat. Hogel patted Perrin's hand. It will be all right, my boy. Perrin stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. How will it be all right, Hogel? They want my wife and babies. They've been successful before in 8 different villages. How do I know those people weren't warned like this and failed to stop them? Tabit covered her mouth in terror and slipped into a chair next to her husband. They're cowards, Perrin bellowed at the message. Going after the most vulnerable and innocent? What could be easier targets than an expecting woman and her 9-month-old daughter? No! Perrin, sit down, Hogel said firmly. Now. Perrin's broad chest heaved up and down as he met Hogel's determined gaze. For a tiny old man, he was profoundly persuasive. Perrin eventually sighed, picked up his chair, and sat down again. With his head in his hands, he murmured, How do I fight this, Hogel? With 100 soldiers, Perrin, Hogel reminded him. Keep her under guard at all times. Or make up an excuse and move her and Jatesy to the guest rooms at the fort, Tabit suggested. Say that there are bugs infesting the house, and it needs to be cleaned out with herbs that might affect your next baby. Hogel nodded. Not a bad idea. There are no bugs in the middle of raining season, Perrin mumbled in irritation. Not under a foot of snow. And Mari would never agree to living at the fort. Sorry, Auntie, he said more quietly. I didn't mean to get angry. She patted his hand. You have every right, Perrin. Perrin, just tell her. She's an intelligent, thoughtful woman. She can handle this, Hogel promised. Perrin looked at him glumly. When she's not expecting, she's a very intelligent, thoughtful woman. But when she's expecting, she's a little emotional. Even though she's only halfway through this expecting, she's still, well, take last week, for example. She said that since the fort had been so quiet, maybe my father would consider shutting it down and letting me take on less dangerous work, like being a rancher. Hogel and Tabit laughed sadly. Obviously, she doesn't know that cattle run away from you, Hogel said. Perrin smiled half-heartedly. She didn't believe me. But then she went on to list all other kinds of work I could do. Something safer that would ensure that her children always have a father. Perrin, Tabit said gently, she knew what she was getting into when she married an officer. I talked to her about it, and so did your mother. But this is precisely the kind of thing she's fretting about, Perrin explained. I know once she's birthed this next baby, she'll be a little more rational, but for the next 3 moons or so, she's terrified something will happen to me. So how am I supposed to tell her that it's not me she should be worried about? There's something more, he said, his shoulders sagging. We haven't been getting much sleep again lately. Tabit frowned. I thought Jatesy was sleeping through the night. She is, Perrin sighed, but recently Mari's been... There's a problem. For the past week, she's already been feeling strong pains. We were up most of the night last night counting them. It's far too early, and the midwife says Mari needs to relax and not feel any stress, so she doesn't risk birthing too soon. Heisemum knows and has been coming over every day to clean up and cook and drive Mari a bit too crazy with too much attention. But can you imagine what this kind of news would do to Mari? She could lose the baby. His voice cracked and he stared at the table again. I had no idea, Tabit whispered. I'll go over tomorrow to help Heisemum. Maybe I can entertain Jatesy. Thank you, Auntie. He smiled at her, but his eyes were wet. We didn't want to worry either of you, but now I see we need all the help we can get. That's why we're here, my boy. Hogel examined the message again. No time frame given. I know, Perrin said. Something can happen tonight or in 5 weeks from now. They always attack at night, correct? Hogel said. So far, which means I need to beef up patrols every night until something happens. But we can't look like we're expecting something. They'll strike when we appear most susceptible. They likely won't want to be out in the freezing temperatures for long. Their black attire stands out rather well against the whiteness. His voice trailed off. Black against white. Hogel and Tabit exchanged glances. Tabit immediately recognized the rector's look of, We need to be alone, dearest. She nodded at her husband, got out of her chair, and went over to kiss her niece's son on the cheek. You'll find a way to succeed, Perrin. I have complete faith in you. Mari, Jatesy, and the new baby will all be fine. Thank you, Auntie. He gave her a practiced smile. After Tabit left, Hogel said, Perrin, why did you come to see me? You're surrounded by far more experienced men than me in matters of battle and garters. Perrin stared at the table. About 11 years ago, I sat with you talking about things, he said vaguely. I remember, Hogel smiled. That was a wonderful time. Perrin scoffed. I was an insufferable 18-year-old beast. You're too kind. Always were. He hesitated before saying, One evening you were teaching me about the refuser. Hogel nodded slowly. I remember that quite well, too. What did I say to you then? Perrin continued to examine the table, yet without fully seeing it. That I was the son of the Creator, that he was the son of the Creator, who refused to take this test we're all in, and that many of the Creator's children followed him into exile. Their spirits are here in this world. While the Creator gave us this world, the refuser stole it for himself and has sought to control and destroy those of us willing to take this test. He's here, with those who followed him, making this existence as miserable as possible. Very good, Hogel said. You could teach it for me this holy day. Perrin didn't smile. But that wasn't all I told you, was it, my boy? Perrin shook his head. No, he whispered. You said something else I've chosen to forget over the years, but keeps coming back at the most unexpected moments. It came back again today, when I opened this message. And what did I tell you 11 years ago, Perrin? Eventually, Perrin said that the refuser knows me intimately, that while he hates all of us, he feels that hatred even more keenly for me. There are a few he most ardently seeks to destroy, and I am near the top of that list. The world really is out to get me. Hogel sighed. Perrin, you have no idea how hard it was for me to say that to an 18-year-old boy. But you had to know it. I didn't know if I would ever get another chance, and I also knew I would never get a decent night's sleep until I did. For weeks, I was plagued with the same dream and the same message that I had to deliver to you. Why me, Hogel? Perrin whispered. His chin began to tremble, and he pressed his lips together tightly for a moment to regain control. Why my wife? My children? They're so innocent. I really don't know, Perrin. Hogel's voice grew husky. You must have a great future ahead of you. Enormous power, influence, abilities. The refuser targets those who can do the most damage to him and his plans. You could take it as a great compliment that he hates you so much. Perrin rolled his eyes. I've done nothing special, Hogel. Not as if I'll do anything important either. What did you tell me when you were going to become that first day of that visit 11 years ago, Perrin? Do you remember? Perrin closed his eyes. I don't want to be general anymore, Hogel, he said. I look at what my father does and who he does it with. I want nothing of that life. But I could never tell him that. I don't ever want to leave Edge. I can't be the general. Hogel put a hand on his shoulder. Don't think about that right now, Perrin. Much can happen in the next 20 years. Think instead about the next 20 days, or 20 minutes. You're not alone in this. When the refuser targets someone, who steps in to help? The Creator, Perrin said, his voice breaking. Hogel slid the note over to him. Here's the first bit of assistance. Someone with knowledge on their side went to extraordinary measures to get this to you. And I wonder why, Perrin picked it up, if they're so evil. Not necessarily, Perrin. Each one of us has tendencies toward good and evil. The test of this existence is to see how often we listen to one side or the other. Whoever sent this to you has spent much of his life in darkness. But occasionally a spark of light catches his eyes, triggers his conscience, and reminds him of who he truly is, a child of the Creator, not a slave of the refuser. For one moment, the author of that note followed that memory and was seared by a conscience he's neglected for who knows how long. I'll pray tonight that he clings to it. Then so will I, as well as pray for many other things, Perrin murmured. For what it's worth, Perrin, I think you'd make a fantastic general. The world needs to be led by men like you. Right now, I think I'd do better leading a herd of cattle. Hogel smiled faintly. You need to go, Perrin. I feel that nothing will happen tonight, but very soon. You need to start preparing immediately. I feel it too. We'll be up all night working on plans. I refuse to give in to the refuser. Hogel, pray for me. I always am, my boy. Mari's mouth moved up and down before she could make any words come out. But you barely got in, and you have to go out again all night? I'm sorry again, he said, kissing her on the lips, but you just said you haven't felt any pain since midday meal, right? Maybe the danger has passed. She didn't kiss him back. But I was really counting on you being here tonight. His eyes sparked mischievously. So was I. A few things to argue about. Mari exhaled in exasperation. You know what I mean. Besides that, she giggled in spite of her frustration, I need an extra set of hands to help me with her. She gestured to Jatesy, who was crawling fast to her father. I ran into Tabit this afternoon, and she said she can come over to help tomorrow. She can give Jatesy a bath in the morning and I'll get her tired before I leave. He picked up his daughter, grunting loudly as if he pretended to strain at the effort, and Jatesy squealed. You're so big, he rubbed noses with her. Look at my big girl, and those tiny teeth sharp as knives. I should start feeding you steak. Mari couldn't stay mad at him, not when he played with his daughter who adored him. Jatesy grabbed at his face and squealed again as he tried to bite her fingers. They always played more aggressively than Mari did. She sat and read books to her daughter, which was about all she could handle right now. But Jatesy didn't mind. She saved up all of her energy for her father. He growled at her. She screamed at him. They were a great combination. Mari plopped on the sofa and grumbled. Perrin put Jatesy on the floor and started crawling and growling after her. Jatesy growled too, screamed in delighted terror, then turned to bat at her father. You're turning her into a wild animal. You know that, don't you? Mari accused. I'm toughening her up, Perrin said in a loud growl, which Jatesy matched. When do you have to leave us? In about 10 minutes, he roared. Jatesy screamed and laughed. And when will you be back? I'm not sure, he howled in a wolf impersonation. Jatesy started to chase him back, gnashing her small teeth. And your father didn't tell you about this until now? The message came in the late afternoon. Perrin scrambled to hide behind a stuffed chair. Jatesy kept up her pursuit, giggling all the way. So, for how many nights? Unsure, he cried in a mock squeal of horror as Jatesy touched his leg and roared at him. Days? Weeks? Maybe. Can you come home during the day to sleep for us to see you? I'll try, he squealed in a high pitch as he crawled away from Jatesy. Have to get a clean uniform. Jatesy was laughing so hard she could barely crawl. Yes, Jatesy's looking exhausted now. I thank you for that, Mari said, dejected. It's so cold outside, too. Full fort night patrols? Really, what kind of garters will be out now? We're drilling in case they change their tactics, he said in a frantic tone of one being pursued by an infant with sharp teeth and a desire to taste her first meat. He came around the sofa where Mari sat, got up on his knees, and kissed her belly. Panting, he looked up into her worried face. I'll dress warmly, and I'll be just fine. You stay here and don't worry. He kissed her again, and this time she returned it. I don't like the sound of this, Perrin. For some reason, I'm feeling very uneasy. He waved that off. That's just your condition, he assured her, putting his hand on her belly. Whoever was in there rolled and kicked at his hand. Perrin chuckled as Mari grimaced. Jatesy never kicked that hard, did she? Not that I remember, Mari said, but the motion is very much like you at night. I'm guessing little Perrin is in there this time. That's why I need to toughen her up, he said to her, to handle a little brother. I hear those can be rough. Ow! He'd forgotten about Jatesy in pursuit. Mari and Perrin looked down at their daughter, her teeth sunk deep into her father's calf. She released him, his trousers leg clearly showing 8 small indentations in a circle. She looked up at them with her dark brown eyes enormous with worry. Oh, she's tough, all right, Mari giggled. Jatesy, don't cry, sweetie. Your father didn't mean to startle you. Perrin twisted to pick her up, gave her a kiss, and placed her on the sofa next to Mari. Did I at least taste good? Jatesy giggled. Perrin sat down on the floor and pulled up his trousers leg to inspect the damage. Look at that. She nearly punctured my flesh. No, she can handle a little brother all right. He chuckled and looked up into Mari's face. Her eyes were filled with tears. Why am I so worried, Perrin? He placed a hand on her belly. No pains, right? No pains, but your condition, my darling wife. Merely your emotions running away with you again, I'll be fine. All will be secured, and you and Jatesy will be fine too. Dress warmly, she sniffed. I've got my overcoat and gloves, so don't worry. Telling me not to worry is like telling Jatesy not to bite you. Useless. I love you, he said before giving her one last kiss. So much that you leave me, she moped. He stood up and put his cap back on. So much that I have to. See you in the morning. Tuma Hifadi didn't even feel a twinge of guilt for knocking loudly on the door so early in the morning. He kept pounding to make sure the message was received. It was. Hugh Gleese yanked open his door, still blinking the sleep out of his eyes. Tuma? Tuma? What's wrong? Why are you here so early? Without waiting for an invitation, the stooped man with faded gray hair and skin stepped quickly into the room, so Hugh could shut the door to the outside cold. We have very little time, Hugh. We need to move men out immediately. Hugh massaged his bleary eyes. What? Why? It was made known to me very early this morning. We need them readied and on their way within the hour. Hugh both nodded and shook his head a little to shake out the sleep, and to make sense of Tuma's words. Are you sure? Tuma didn't move a muscle. I'm sorry, Hugh said. Of course you're sure. Who am I to question? So, how many do you need? How many do we have? Staff Sergeant Gazada stood outside the shop, trying not to look conspicuous as he waited for it to open. He shifted nervously, not because he was cold. His army-issued woolen overcoat kept him quite toasty, but because he never visited this part of the market. He was usually several shops away at one of the bakeries, awaiting the fresh goods to come out of the ovens. They even knew his name down there, but no one here was familiar with him. That was probably why the older woman coming to her door regarded him suspiciously. Is there something wrong, soldier? She asked, looking him up and down as she pulled out her key for the latch on the door. No, no, he beamed, his dark rosy cheeks nearly purple with the cold and his nervousness. I just need a coat. She unlatched the door. That overcoat is as fine as anything I have in here. Oh, it's not for me, he said quickly. It's for my brother. His birthday. Want to get him something nice. The woman shrugged and opened the door to let him in. I hope you can find something you like. Anything in particular? Yes, actually, he said with an awkward chuckle. Do you have anything in white? A white coat, she pulled a face. White in raining season. He nodded eagerly. My brother has always liked white. Why? Is that wrong? No, nothing wrong with white, she answered quickly. It's just not very common. Gazada nodded and looked at the clothing hanging on rods along the walls of the shop. His eyes were drawn immediately to one in particular. Ah, this one perhaps? He walked over to a long white coat with a hood edged in fur. This is white. The woman winced. Yes, it is, but... This is fur, isn't it? Gazada stroked the fluffy white edges along the front and the bottom. Feels like a bunny I once had as a child. It is rabbit, the woman said, gently trying to take it out of his hands. The latest item in fashion. Perhaps such a coat would be inappropriate since it reminds you of a beloved pet. Oh, not that beloved. We turned it into an excellent stew. Carrots, turnips, onions. Well, you see, she said, clenching her teeth as he put it on and strained to wrap it around the front of his ample body. It being the latest item in fashion means it's also very expensive. The staff sergeant, stroking the white fur on the front, paused. How expensive? 20 full slips of silver. She looked appropriately shocked. The sergeant went back to petting the memory of the stew. That's within my price range, actually, at the very end of it, but... It's a woman's coat, the shop owner blurted. You can't buy it for your brother. Gazada only slowed in his petting. Doesn't look like a woman's coat to me. But it will to everyone else. Look at the design of the rabbit fur. It's stitched in butterflies. Oh, do you have any other white coats? No, she admitted, looking around frantically in case the coat decided to pale overnight in order to fit the sergeant's odd need. And it doesn't completely close on your front. If your brother is the same size, the sergeant shook his head. Need it only to close around the chest area. My brother is the same size there, but not down here, he chuckled as he patted his round belly. I'll take it. It's perfect. The woman rubbed her cheeks with one last protest. But people will laugh at your brother if he wears that in public. He's not expecting to be seen much in public with it, ma'am, and certainly not in Edge. Not in Edge. Oh, well then, that's different. Shall I wrap it for you? Karna walked tensely to the feed barn outside the compound as the sun was setting. Although the entire reason for what was about to take place had been explained to him, he still felt very ill at ease. His only consolation was that he wasn't the only one unhappy about it. He glanced around before stepping into the barn, but it was unnecessary. Nearly every soldier was out on patrol in the new all-night training regime devised by the command board in Idemia, or so they were told. Edge was the first to try the experiment, and while the soldiers weren't too thrilled about altering their sleep schedules so that every last one of them was on the night shift, they were obedient. Besides, it had been dull for the past year, so this was definitely something new and even a bit exciting. The lieutenant slipped into the barn and saw the lamplight coming from the middle of it. He quickly made his way there, weaving around large bales of hay, and when he saw the scene, he kept his in his head. I still can't believe you're doing this, sir. Not, sir, Perrin said as he finished unbuttoning his uniform jacket. He took it off and handed it to Grampy Neeks, who also groaned in displeasure. Without my uniform, I am no longer the captain. Just call me Perrin, he said. Told you that before, Brillin. He stood in the frigid air in only his thin white undershirt, goosebumps developing on his large shoulders. Gazzato winced and looked at the other two soldiers. When Idemia finds out, Karna shook his head. You remember what General Cush said after that first raid? Yes, Brillin, I remember, Perrin intoned. If Idemia finds out, I'm out of the army. Well, you know what? I don't care what Cush, Mal, or even my father has to say about this. I'm not about to sit waiting for garters to come after my family. It's not as if I'm violating the Creator's law. It's a rule made by a man who didn't anticipate such a scenario. I have no doubt Pershin would approve of my breaking his rule to save his granddaughter-in-law and great-grandchildren. Karna, Neeks, and Gazada exchanged dubious looks as Perrin began to unbutton his trousers. But you could lose your commission. Brillin, Perrin stopped unbuttoning halfway. I'd rather be an impoverished sausage-on-a-stick vendor in Moreland with a family than be the next High General of Idemia knowing that I let my wife and children die. Mari would prefer to live as well, I'm sure. So I'll do what's right and let the Creator decide my fate. Grampy Neeks sighed loudly and shook his head while Gazada bit his lip. Karna cleared his throat. So she believed your night training story? Of course she believed my story, he said tersely, removing his trousers. She trusts me completely, as she should. She knows I have to go out on a second night and perhaps for many more to do my duty. But since none of you is married, I can see why you don't understand. Neeks rubbed his mouth. Can't believe I'm watching this happen, he murmured as Captain Shin, Perrin, handed him his trousers. You have no choice, Grampy, Perrin said almost as coldly as he felt. So quit complaining, all right? He glanced down at himself in only his thin undershirt and shorts. At least these are white, too. He shivered, picked up a thick knitted wool tunic, white, that lay on a bale of hay, and pulled it over his head. Next he took a pair of brown woolen trousers and pulled those on. Sorry if they're a little loose, Gazada apologized as Perrin fastened them in the front, but I had to guess at the size. Not a problem, Perrin said. Better than being too tight. Over the trousers he put on the only kind of white leg coverings Gazada could find in the middle of raining season. Thin linen dress trousers. Fit for a picnic, those are, the Staff Sergeant smiled. That's what the shopkeeper told me. He wasn't even sure why he still had them in stock, but fortunate for us, right, sir? I mean, Perrin? Karna and Neeks glowered at Gazada. He looked back at them confused, unsure of the cause of their irritation. And now for the final touch, Perrin said as he lifted the long white coat off another bale of hay. Gazada sighed. It's simply lovely, isn't it? Perrin stopped in mid-motion and stared at the staff sergeant. Could let your wife wear it when you're finished. They do alterations at that shop, Gazada assured him. Do they also remove bloodstains, Gazada? Perrin said heavily, because when I'm done with it, I anticipate this rabbit fur looking worse than the day it was slaughtered. Gazada swallowed. Perhaps Mrs. Shin would prefer another coat, then. Perhaps Mrs. Shin will never hear about this coat or any other coat from you, Staff Sergeant. That's the entire reason I sent you, so no one would see me purchasing these things and telling my wife she might be getting a surprise. This is one surprise I never intend for her to find out about. Right? He thrust a fist through the sleeve. Gazada shrank in his own overcoat and nodded quickly. Of course, sir. Of course. We all understand, Captain, Karna said, walking up to him. From his overcoat pocket he pulled out thick white gloves and a white knitted hat. Perrin pulled the hat over his head, concealing his black hair underneath. Not that we approve, Perrin, Karna added. The nearly all-white man acted as if he didn't hear Karna finally calling him by his first name. It was likely because Brillen's tone was as foul as a sulfur pit. Shin slipped on the gloves and said to his lieutenant, Where are they? Karna pulled out 2 long knives from another pocket, dulled so as not to catch any light that might reflect down from the 2 moons, nearly full that night. Excellent, Shin said with half a smile. Good work. He slipped the 2 dulled knives into his waistband and put on his boots, the only thing still black. He took 2 more shiny knives from a bale of hay and put them into the sides of his boots. 4 knives, Neeks said, slowly shaking his head. Yep, Perrin said easily. Not that I'm planning to lose all of them, but one can never be too sure. He took up the full quiver of arrows waiting on another bale of hay and slung it over his shoulder. Are the other 2 quivers placed where I wanted them? Karna nodded. Did it about half an hour ago. You have enough arrows to kill an army now. Perrin picked up the large bow and checked the string. Nice choice, Brillen. Your strength is in the sword, Neeks reminded him. A sword is loud and obvious, Perrin reminded back. Just like you, Karna bravely whispered. Karna, I can't help but notice my second mind gets more vocal and braver the closer I get to the forest. And Grampy, I'm sufficient with the bow, Perrin assured him. Not as skilled as Brillen, mind you, but I can take something out from a distance this way, unseen and mostly unheard. This is madness, Neeks hissed. Goes against every rule in the book. If the High General knew... Perrin rounded on the older man. He will know nothing, Neeks. Not unless something goes terribly wrong, and then it will be too late for him to demote me. But if everything goes right, then what I'm about to do won't matter at all. Is that understood, Master Sergeant? Neeks simply folded his arms. He'd been in the army too long to be intimidated by mere officers. You said you're no longer the captain, remember? And since I have more experience than Karna in a battle situation, I'm in command. And if I don't like what I see happening, I'll use that position and pull rank. Is that understood, Perrin? Perrin took a deep breath, accentuating his broad chest. Implausibly, even the white bunny fur stitched into butterflies appeared threatening. You do something stupid, Neeks, you'll have to explain why to my wife and daughter. Tell them why they're now vulnerable. Is that understood? Neeks didn't flinch. Don't do anything stupid then, Captain. Shin pulled the fur-trimmed hood over his knitted cap. Do I look like I'm about to do something stupid? Karna couldn't hold in his pfft. Are you expecting an honest answer for that, sir? Not really, Shin said, almost smiling. Now remember, tell the men I'm still point commander, but I'm at a hidden location in order to observe without interfering. Any questions from the soldiers will be funneled directly to you two. He pointed to Karna and Neeks, with the understanding that I will receive the message only from either one of you. The moment I see or hear anything, I'll sound the signal, and you call for defensive positions. Gazada, you're in charge here at the fort. We know, Lieutenant Karna said impatiently. Let's just get this over with. That's the problem, Neeks mumbled. We may be doing this nonsense for weeks. I don't know why you're still complaining, Grampy, Shin glared at Neeks. I'm the one wearing a woman's fur coat to go on a midnight picnic in the middle of the forest during raining season. Mari didn't even hear him come into the bedroom. When she opened her eyes, there he stood, hovering over her. All she could do was whimper. I'm not very happy with you, Perrin growled. You didn't even lock the doors? What's the point of reinforcing the windows and doors with iron bars if you don't use any of it? Mari pushed herself up into a sitting position. Jatsi stayed snoozing next to her. I wanted to make sure you could get in this morning. You realize you're such a bear when you've been up all night? He'd taken off his uniform jacket and was setting it properly on the chair again. I thought I explained to you very clearly last night that we're practicing for attack scenarios. That, Mrs. Shin, includes you. Mari's eyes grew large. You will bar those windows and lock those doors as you've been instructed as soon as I leave the house tonight. Understand? Yes, she blinked back tears. You have to go out again tonight? Yes. Jatsi sat up, her light brown hair in wild disarray, and beamed at her father. Then she screamed at him. Not now, Jates. He sat down on the side of the bed, and Jatsi crawled over to him. He smiled and kissed her cheek. Want to rest with me for a while? She roared in response. He lay down on the bed, and she immediately thumped his chest with her fist. How did it go last night? Mari asked timidly. Fine. Boring. He closed his eyes. Which is good. Sort of. She dared to kiss him. I missed you. He only grunted. Mari pulled Jatsi away, quietly got off the bed, and shut the bedroom door behind them. That night, in the barn, Perrin put on 2 extra pairs of socks. My feet started to go numb last night until I found that one spot. Neeks, holding his weapon, squinted. What spot? A place where the snow was all melted and steam rose from the ground. Even some scrawny deer were there, eating the last of the grasses. Fascinating, really. You see, I don't want to hear it. Neeks shook his weather-beaten head. I can't claim innocence about your doings if I know too many details. Oh, Grampy, Perrin chided as he put on his white knitted sweater again. I told you. I left the letter with the surgeon. Should anything go wrong, the letter exonerates you, Karna, Gazada, and everyone else at the fort. My father will know that I acted alone and that no one else at the fort participated with me or had any power to prevent my activities. He slipped on the 2 pairs of trousers. The surgeon even signed it, verifying that I was of sound mind. What he was signing, he still doesn't know, nor will he know unless... He left the rest up to Neeks' imagination as he put on the white coat. This really did the trick last night, kept out the chill quite nicely. Indeed, a lovely coat. Grampy grunted that he was not amused and handed Perrin his long knives, then his quiver and bow. Just bring back that lovely coat back again tomorrow morning, still white. Deep in the forest, the man in white and gray mottled clothing peered up at the boulder field, faintly illuminated by the light of the moons. It was another cloudless night, which meant it would be exceptionally cold again. But that wasn't a concern as long as he sat by the warm steam vent. His mouth dropped open as he saw them come, pouring from a thick stand of trees, as if the entire neighborhood was dropping by his eating room for a snack. What's going on? He whispered to the first man to reach him. Why so many? Something different, the man told him as he was joined by many others, eager to warm their hands and feet by the vent. But, stammered the man whose cozy surroundings had been invaded. It's cold. Nothing ever happens in the snow. I told you, something different, and we have little time to find our positions. Mari was watching the back door as she stirred the cracked wheat for breakfast. She smiled when he marched up the back stairs and yanked on the door. She would have heard his yelp of surprise all the way up in her bedroom. All right, you locked the door. Very good. Now let me in. Mari chuckled and went to the back door, unlatched the locks, and slid away the 3 long iron rods that secured it. He pulled it open. Now, how did you know it was me? What if I was a garter? I knew it was you, Perrin. I watched you jump over the fence. But what if I wasn't alone? What if a garter was holding a knife to my throat, making me say those things? Mari sighed. You'd never submit to that. I'd sooner find a dead husband at my door. To her surprise, he smiled. Yes, you would. Very good. Another boring night? She asked as he kissed her on the cheek. Yes. Many more? He shrugged. Not sure. Breakfast, then bed? He nodded. Where's Jatesy? Actually asleep in her cradle in her room. They heard a high-pitched scream. But now she's awake and wants you, Mari sighed. He smiled. I can give her, and you, 10 minutes. It was Karna's turn that night to help prepare the captain. No more finding warm spots in the forest, all right? Grampy told you about that? Perrin adjusted his gloves. I have to admit, I am curious as to what else you find out there. In the dark, everything covered with snow. Perrin shook his head. Not everything is covered with snow. The ground is warm, even hot in many areas where we were in before. Then there's... Stop! I don't want to hear it. Karna covered his ears like a toddler. Grampy said you'd start talking again, and we really shouldn't know. Your name is on that letter too, Brillin. You won't be in any kind of trouble. But I already feel I am. Perrin, Karna dared to say his first name because sometimes second minds really needed to get through to the first ones. Maybe it is nothing, he said earnestly. Maybe it's an elaborate hoax. Was there anyone mean-spirited that you went to command school with? Brillin, Perrin said as he put on the quiver. Only about half my class. But this is no trick. I feel it deep in my bones. Sure that's just not the cold you're feeling? It's another clear night. It's real, Lieutenant. Brillin took a deep breath. Are you sure you're the only one who can break this rule, go over this wall, barge into the forest? You know it as well as I do. I can see it in your eyes. Besides, your skin's not pale enough. Brillin exhaled in unwilling agreement. Mari was putting the iron bars back into her windows again, grunting as she did so. Why did your grandmother Pato insist on taking these down today, Jatesy? So what if they look uninviting? That's kind of the point. She knew I'd have to put them back up again. Jatesy pulled out some wooden blocks from the bottom shelf. Good idea, Jates. Trip up any intruders on your scattered toys. We could... The sudden knock on the front door filled her with immediate fear. No one would be coming by this late at night unless... She hesitated until she heard the knock again. Mari, it's cold out here. Hogel! She rushed to the front door, unlatched the bolts, and opened it as quickly as she could. What are you doing here? Is Tabit well? Hogel stepped quickly inside and shut the door behind him. Tabit's just fine, my dear, he said as he undid the long scarf wrapped around his face and unfastened the thick coat. We're actually worried about you with these all-night training sessions. Tonight, I had a feeling that maybe you'd appreciate some company. I'd be happy to sleep on the sofa there, keep the fire going, get Jatesy for you when she wakes up in the night, he offered a little bashfully. Oh, Hogel, Mari felt herself growing weepy. I hate to see you sleep on the sofa or to spend a night away from Tabit. But that wasn't what she meant at all. And Hogel could tell. It was Tabit's idea, and I was more than happy to agree with her. If you send me home, she'll only be angry with me. Mari swallowed and nodded, sniffing her gratitude. Any recent pains? Some this morning, Mari admitted, but after I rested this afternoon, they stopped again. Well, let's make sure it stays that way. Now, Hogle said, clapping his hands, I see some bars that need replacing. I think I'm up to that. Why don't you get little Jatesy ready for bed and let me finish down here? Thank you, Hogle. She kissed him on the cheek. About 15 minutes later, Mari left her bedroom after lulling Jatesy to sleep. Mari really didn't want Jatesy disturbing her great-great-uncle tonight, so she would stay in her parents' bed. From the storage trunk on the landing, Mari pulled out a thick blanket and 2 pillows and started to make her way downstairs. She paused when she saw that Hogle, who had finished securing the iron rods in the windows and doors, was now standing near the eating room table. Not realizing that he was being watched, he slowly slid open the secret drawer and retrieved the long knife. He peered suspiciously at the blade as if it might suddenly come to life. Hogle touched it gingerly, winced, and then did something extraordinary. He slipped the long knife into his waistband, making sure that the handle was concealed under his knitted tunic. Mari was stunned motionless. What in the world did an 82-year-old rector think he could accomplish with a long knife? She stepped noiselessly back up the stairs to her bedroom and sat down on the massive bed to think. Why was Hogle here and so worried about securing the house? Why? Mari realized that she was the dumbest woman in the world. How could she have been self-absorbed to not see it? Last year, Perrin had spent raining season teaching his soldiers hand-to-hand combat in the indoor training arena. He said he wouldn't force the men into the bitter cold unless there was a legitimate... Oh, dear Creator, Mari whispered and held her belly. There really is something happening, isn't there? Why wouldn't he tell me? A tightening of muscles in her lower back that spread around to her front told her why. She took a deep breath to calm herself, although that never worked. He didn't want me to worry, so naturally I'm worrying even more. And the only reason Hogle is here is because... She closed her eyes to stop the tears, the stupid tears that so easily trickled out whenever she was expecting a baby. Because tonight the world is out to get my husband. That is the end of this very long chapter. Da 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 da. Yeah, still can't do music. Thank you.